Seth is a disgusting loser abandoned by his village for being a pathetic sorcerer. Eventually, he sets out to become powerful along with a cool baddie and a fatso. Along the way, Seth learns about his sealed god powers that makes him the strongest in the world. However, before any of this, the world overflows with a power known as fantasia, and those with this power become either heroes or demons. Furthermore, monsters called Nemesis started appearing in this world, and the people who survive an encounter with Nemesis are called sorcerers. Seth, a sorcerer and a porcupine head boy, is hanging out in town and goes to meet with his friend named Tommy. He brings some magic books along and tries showing Tommy some magic tricks but fails to do so. Eventually, he locks in and manages to strike a boulder, which pisses a bunch of cows who are now out for revenge. Meanwhile, a shopkeeper refuses to give some supplies to another sorcerer named Alma. However, she confronts him for his rude behavior and forces him to give the supplies to her. She then notices a bunch of cows running towards her, and Seth being the reason makes her mad. Luckily, she uses her magic to keep Seth out of trouble and promises that he will be punished for his actions. Suddenly, all the townsfolk gather around and start mocking Alma for being a sorcerer and creating trouble. In the end, she agrees to pay for the damage and decides to leave. On their way back, Seth mentions that it wasn't even Alma's fault, and she replies that normal people are scared of sorcerers. Back at home, Seth is forced to clean the house as punishment, while Alma tells him that he could be executed for being a sorcerer if things get out of hand. He then asks Alma the reason those people put all the blame on her, and she replies that they look at sorcerers the same way they look at Nemesis, in other words, as monsters. Seth then requests Alma to pull him up as he wants to rub one out, but she refuses to do so. Later that night, Seth decides to become a powerful sorcerer and get rid of Nemesis so they don't have to deal with the hatred. The next day, Seth practices magic again and burns his hand instead. Tommy mentions that his mother told him not to play with sorcerers any longer, and Seth replies that they don't know the benefits of magic yet. He then tells Tommy about his dream of eliminating all the Nemesis, informing him about how Alma has been fighting them for a really long time. Just then, they notice a Nemesis egg flying in the sky, and unfortunately, Alma is out fighting another Nemesis. This gives Seth the idea to fight it on his own, and he returns to his house to gear up and bring all the supplies along. On the other hand, the townsfolk are gathered around the Nemesis when Seth arrives, and they start mocking him once again. Suddenly, the egg breaks and a Nemesis emerges. Seth tries attacking, but it doesn't work, and he pulls out his sword, which breaks upon contact. The Nemesis punches Seth into a shop, and Tommy tries to go towards Seth but ends up in front of the Nemesis. Just then it is about to attack Tommy. Seth manages to save him from getting crushed and tries his best to get back up but starts struggling. Tommy starts panicking and calls out for help, which results in the Nemesis getting attacked by an unknown force. Turns out it is another set of sorcerers, with an old fart taking the lead. Seeing the unknown sorcerer surprises, but by that time, the Nemesis gets back up. The geezer orders his lackeys, and they manage to restrict the movements of Nemesis. They then introduce themselves as Wandering Nemesis Hunters, Bravery Quartet. Seth quickly notices how little of an aura they possess, and the old guy, Don, tells Seth to leave everything to them. This results in Seth asking them to let him fight alongside them, and seeing his determination impresses Don, saying that it was God's will that brought them face to face. Annoyingly, the peasants start bad-mouthing Seth, saying Seth is a disgusting loser who always brings trouble. But Don replies that he has faith in Seth and mentions that the Nemesis won't be restricted for long. He then informs everyone that they need to evacuate and asks Seth to grab the Nemesis's attention so that everyone can escape. Furthermore, he tells Seth to be smart and run if he needs to, as that is also a smart decision. With that being said, everyone along with the Bravery Quartet ran away, leaving Seth behind. Seth starts off by powering up his hand and punching the Nemesis, which doesn't work, so he decides to run away instead. After running away for a while, Seth manages to land a kick on its face, making him laugh at the goofy face the Nemesis made. Nonetheless, he continues to attack and fails, reminding him of Don's words to act smart. Seth then finds a chain and makes the Nemesis trip, followed by Seth wrapping the chain around his body. Seeing how the Nemesis can't move anymore, Seth tries to dig out some information, which makes the Nemesis mad as it fires an attack at Seth. Meanwhile, Alma is on her way back, cursing the oldies for mistaking a cow for a Nemesis. She notices something is wrong and increases her speed. Elsewhere, Seth realizes that the damage of that attack was equivalent to a hollow purple, and a direct hit means instant demise. On the other hand, the Bravery Quartet binds all the townsfolk and starts looting them. The townsfolk start cursing Don for his evil deeds, but he mentions how he managed to keep them safe from the Nemesis. At the same time, Seth appears and Don mentions how they made a fortune while he kept the Nemesis busy. The townsfolk start thinking that Seth is a part of Don's gang, and he tells Seth that their real name is treasure hunters who take advantage of the Nemesis to steal riches. Seth confronts them for not fighting the Nemesis, and Don mentions that there is no point in fighting for people who mock them. Furthermore, Dawn tells Seth that he doesn't live the same lives as those people, and for them, he is the same as a nemesis. The geezer believes that taking advantage of these people is the right choice and gives Seth some money as a gift. However, Seth punches Dawn instead, commenting on how sorcerers are nothing like them. Sadly, one attack by the lackey brings Seth down, and Dawn tells Seth that he will soon learn that he was right. This fight results in the nemesis appearing, and the Bravery Quartet decides to take their leave, advising Seth to run as well. Everyone starts thinking that they might be done for and begin losing hope as the nemesis powers up its attack. But Seth gets back on his feet and mentions that he will take care of it. The nemesis eventually attacks, and Dawn, who is watching from afar, calls Seth foolish, just to notice that Seth is actually holding off the attack on his own. After tanking the attack, Seth moves forward and punches the nemesis in its guts, cracking its face and creating a hole in its body. Everyone is surprised that Seth used his bare hands, and Dawn decides to scram as well. This attack makes Seth unable to move, and the nemesis starts getting back up. Just then, Alma arrives and attacks the nemesis, bringing it down for good. Seth then loses consciousness and wakes up in his home, where Alma informs him that everyone is safe and she caught the Bravery Quartet as well. She then confronts him for doing such reckless things, as normal sorcerers don't use bare hands. Alma explains that the Inquisition hates those who aren't normal, and the villagers most likely are contacting them as they speak. This reminds Alma of when Tommy gave her Seth's burnt glove after the fight and thanked her for saving them, calling Seth a cool dude. Back in the present, she once again reminds him that normal people can't understand sorcerers. This results in Seth telling her his dream of eradicating all the nemesis, which she finds foolish. Alma then tells him of a place called Radiant where the nemesis nest exists, but it's only a legend. Hearing this makes Seth motivated to go to Radiant, and Alma once again reminds Seth that Nemesis is not their only enemy. Eventually, she agrees to let him help her out next time. However, Seth is still pissed that the townsfolk might chase them out, and Alma mentions that protecting him is her job. Later that night, Alma thinks back to the time when she came out alive from a disaster and saw Seth lying next to her. At that time, she had lost everything but a child who she had no recollection of. Following that, she took Seth to all the places around the world, but no one had any recollection of her or Seth. Suddenly, she started experiencing a headache and thought about how her curse was being a sorcerer. Back then, Seth was nothing but a burden for her, and she thought of abandoning him countless times, but he was the only lead she had toward finding herself out. One day, she left Seth home and went out to hunt some nemesis to earn some bread. Back at home, the kids started bullying Seth and calling him infected. They continue on beating him up until Seth explodes. At night, Alma returned and saw all the villagers ready to execute Seth. Just when they were about to burn him, the fire went out and Alma appeared, grabbing the man's face and saying that he was now infected as well. She then decided to touch everyone else as well, making them all run away. Afterward, Alma thinks that it is all a myth and hugs Seth, telling him to relax. At that moment, she realized how small and helpless Seth was and made up her mind to not let anyone call him a bad guy. Now, all she needed was a place where they could live in peace, and got themselves the flying house from Up. From that day forward, the two of them started living their lives as they sailed across countless skies. Back in the present, Alma catches Seth trying to sneak out and questions if he really intends to go. Surprisingly, she decides not to stop him and hands him her broom, saying that even a wannabe like him needs a broom. Alma then makes him promise to not become a monster, and he makes up his mind to become the greatest sorcerer. Before Seth leaves, he gives her a hug, and Alma tells him to take care of himself. With that being said, Seth leaves and Alma fails to hold on to her tears any longer. The townsfolk also wish him goodbye as he leaves the village. Alma calls the doctor at her house and scolds him for arriving so late when she called him 3 days ago. Furthermore, she only agrees to give him a reward if he brings Nemesis remains back, and with that being said, he leaves. Meanwhile, Seth is fighting a bunch of knights who want to arrest him. They tell their captain that Seth crashed into the ship. Seth eventually manages to toss the knights aside, and the captain realizes that he is a sorcerer. The captain, Dart, calls Seth ignorant, and his comrade tells Seth that he used magic in front of their presence without any permit or identification, which means they have to arrest him. Dart mentions that it's the law, and they start jumping on him once again. Following that, they put Seth in jail and take his belongings. This results in him trying to break the cage but failing to do so, and Dart mentions that they specialize in dealing with sorcerers. Seth tells them that he needs to go to Radiant. The knights start calling him an idiot, and Dart tells Seth that saying the word nemesis is taboo and he shouldn't take it that lightly. Furthermore, he starts calling Seth cursed, and when he tries to argue, they put him in the basement. This reminds Seth of the time when Alma advised him to head to Artemis as he could find some clues regarding Radiant. Alma tells him that it is a town where the most powerful sorcerers gather, and ask him to look for someone named Yaga, considering he's the most powerful. Additionally, she asked him to be wary of the yellow cat. Seth then notices a little bird that comes out of the girl's hair who is imprisoned right next to him. Her name is Melly, and she was sent from Artemis to retrieve the nemesis that he defeated. The bird on her head is Mr. Boobry, who is most like her friend. Apparently, she is a sorcerer who is training under Doc. As time passes, the two of them become friends and suddenly hear a loud bang. Apparently, it is Doc who came to get Melly back, but she yells the word nemesis, making the guards suspicious. In the end, Doc is put in a cage alongside them as well. Doc informs Seth that he went to retrieve the nemesis he defeated, but it was torn to bits and worth nothing. Seth wonders why he doesn't fight Nemesis, and he replies that he's a researcher and it is one dangerous job that he leaves for the sorcerers. Following that, Seth mentions Radiant and Doc finds out that he is Alma's pupil. Luckily, Mr. Boobry manages to steal the keys and all three of them get out of their cages. With that being said, they escape the basement and Seth forces them to look for his belongings but fails to find them. Just then, Seth notices the knights taking them away and tries to go after them when Dart appears out of nowhere along with all the knights. Having no other choice, Seth starts fighting them while Melly uses her shield to block the arrows. However, it eventually breaks and they end up being surrounded. Suddenly, Melly becomes a different person and starts fighting them on her own. Doc informs Seth that Melly's personality does a 180 during extreme stress. The knights realize that Melly is a witch, and following that, she blows them off the ship. In an instant, she finds Dart standing right next to her. Just then, Seth gets on his broomstick and punches one side of the side, tilting the whole thing. This gives them the chance to return to Doc's ship and escape. Melly apologizes for her personality switch, but Seth finds it interesting and asks her to teach him. Their ship finally arrives at Artemis and passes through an inspection magic circle as a measure of security. Seth gets excited seeing all the other ships of sorcerers, and after landing their ship, they arrive at the security checkpoint. The receptionist asks Seth if he wants to register himself as a citizen, and before Seth can say anything, Doc forces him to do so as Yaga might not meet a non-resident. Eventually, they enter the main city and Melly mentions that people call it the Sorcerer Paradise. Following that, Doc informs them about the academy admissions and the three of them later arrive at the academy. The admission ceremony starts and the host introduces the creator of the academy, who Seth recognizes as the Yellow Cat. The headmaster then starts yapping about various stuff and tells his goal to eradicate the curse on sorcerers, which Seth finds incredible. He then calls the new students on stage, which includes Seth as well. The headmaster mentions that they will be able to attend the academy if they sign a contract and pressures Seth to do so, which he ends up doing. Suddenly, the contract expands and they are surprised to see how the Yellow Cat wants them to pay a hefty amount. He mentions that the only way to repay their debt is to take part in missions as Artemis Hunter. With that being said, the ceremony ends and Doc is glad that Seth will be busy and he won't have to see his scarecrow-looking face again. But unluckily, as Seth's guardian, Doc is forced to take part in repaying the debt as well. Seth remembers how Alma told him to stay away from the Yellow Cat, and Melly tells Seth that the same happened to her, but he left the work to the hairy geezer. Following that, Seth reassures Doc that he will be leaving as soon as he finds Yaga, and Melly agrees to help. With that being said, they start their journey to find Yaga and decide to walk around town. Seth and Melly end up taking the moving walkway, not knowing it costs money. Nonetheless, they keep on increasing their debts and eventually arrive at a bar where Melly's personality changes and she blows it away. In the end, they return back to where they started and people start calling Seth the Debt King. Following that, Seth talks about how this place really is like paradise for the sorcerers. Suddenly, they notice a pot sitting next to them from which a geezer Zoro comes out. Apparently, he agrees to help Seth look for Yaga and asks about what he thinks of Artemis. Seth replies that the Garfield-looking cat is a fraud. Everything is expensive, but sorcerers can live in peace. He then asks Seth why the Majesty demands so much money, but before Seth can reply, the siren starts going crazy. The Doc thinks that it's an attack and the Inquisition most likely followed them. However, before they can even enter Artemis, a ton of sorcerers surround the ship. Dart mentions that he expected this much and wonders how much money the Majesty threw around to do this. Furthermore, he tells his men that fighting them is like fighting whole nations and orders them to retreat. On the other hand, the green-haired oldie tells Seth that the Majesty spends all this cash to keep the sorcerers safe, and Seth starts thinking of Garfield as a good kitty. Seth then tells him about his dream to go to Radiant, but he argues that staying at Artemis and protecting this paradise might be a better choice, as Radiant might as well be a myth. But Seth refuses and tells him that he needs to go to Radiant as eradicating the Nemesis is the only way to protect the people. This results in Zoro agreeing to help them out and finally telling them that he is the Yaga Seth was searching for. The next morning, Melly wakes up from a good night's sleep when Seth comes running, asking her to teach him her magic tricks. He then tells Melly how he gave Yaga the letter from Alma, asking him about Radiant. However, he burns the letter and tells Seth to become strong on his own if he wants Yaga to teach him. Seth agrees and showcases his Titan Punch, only for Yaga to mock him for doing such a simple thing. Yaga further tells him to learn basic offensive magic if he wants his help. Back in the present, he requests her to teach him the magic she used on the ship, but Melly apologizes, saying that only her other personality knows how to do it and this form can barely use it. He then asks her to teach him how to gather fantasia, but her 2 brain cells fail to complete this task. In the end, Seth decides to train on his own, but Melly gets an idea. Later, Doc is waiting for his crush with a rose and accidentally offers it to Seth and Melly. Just then, the baddie he likes, Melba, arrives and Seth introduces himself to her. Suddenly, the puppet on Melba's hand strikes Doc for being a creep, and Melly mentions that he is Melba's papa and a great cook. Eventually, they both get tired after their fight and Melba apologizes, saying that her papa gets worked up easily. As an apology, Melba decides to treat them, and after eating their fill, Seth thanks her. Following that, Seth tells Melba about Radiant, which she finds really interesting, making the Doc jealous. He further mentions that learning offensive magic is necessary for him and asks Doc for help. At first, he refuses and blames Seth for all the debt, but as soon as Melba encourages him to help Seth, he agrees. Later, Melba gives them her special tea, which they all struggle to drink. Before Melba gives them any more tea, Doc makes the excuse of Seth's training and runs away. Afterward, Doc regrets agreeing to train Seth and tells him that fighting is off the charts and all he can do is read grimoires. To start things off, Doc teaches him an attack called Meteor Drops. After listening to the instructions, Seth tries copying them and slowly powers up Fantasia, only to fail. Nonetheless, he keeps on trying again and again, eventually exploding himself along with Doc. This results in Doc refusing to teach him any more stuff, and having no other choice, Melly changes her personality. She then decides to pound the magic tricks in Seth's body and starts attacking him with meteor drops until Doc gets struck by one of them. But it doesn't affect Melly as she keeps on following Seth and attacking him. Their training starts damaging the city as well, and seeing how his voice is not reaching her, Seth decides to fight back. Fortunately, he manages to attack using meteor drops, making Melly return back to her normal form and freak out after seeing the destruction she caused. She instantly starts apologizing to Seth, but he thanks her instead as her teaching makes it easy to understand. The next day, he shows it to Yaga, who ends up giving him a bleak compliment. Seth gets overjoyed, but Yaga tells him that Radiant is a forbidden territory where even skilled sorcerers can't go, and an ugly noob like him stands no chance. Apparently, he first has to become a first-class sorcerer, and Yaga knows someone who can help Seth. Out of nowhere, Yaga attacks Seth, which he manages to block with his hands. Yaga then advises Seth to learn how to control far more magic than this attack with his hands. The next morning, Melly wakes up and Seth barges into her room once again, asking her to let him stay as he has been sleeping in the park. Turns out that even sleeping in the park isn't free, and the Doc forced him to find a place to stay. Fortunately, Melly agrees to let him stay at her house as there is one extra room she doesn't use. Doc is having a cup of coffee on his own at Melba Cafe and enjoying his time until the 2 brats appear. Seth complains about Yaga's training routine and invites Doc to eat with them. However, he refuses and mentions how he never was their buddy to start with. Melba then offers him her new coffee, and knowing it might taste awful, he still accepts it and hesitantly takes a sip. Surprisingly, it turns out to be delicious, making Doc think his life might finally go uphill when suddenly an octopus appears and takes him down the manhole. Seth thinks that it might be the work of a nemesis, but Yaga appears, saying that it was not a nemesis, but a creature called Devilfish Kraken. Apparently, this creature doesn't eat humans and likes to drink coffee instead. However, Melba mentions that the fatty drinks a lot of coffee, and her papa says that his body reeks of coffee, which might make the devilfish devour him. This theory makes everyone, including Yaga, a bit concerned. Meanwhile, the devil Kraken steals Doc's coffee and starts drinking it. Afterward, it holds Doc with its tentacles and is about to eat him, but a stronger aroma of coffee envelops the place. Turns out it is Seth and Melly's doing, as Yaga refused to help them as they needed this experience. Soon after, the Kraken appears and Doc begs Seth to save him. This results in Seth punching the Kraken, only to ricochet due to its soft body. They try to go after it again, but Kraken sprays its ink on them. On the other hand, Dart advises his comrade to take a break and stop looking for Seth, mentioning that he doesn't seem as dangerous as General Torque thinks. For the time being, Seth and Melly stop the chase in order to clean themselves. Seth comes up with a plan to stop the Kraken's movements, which Melly seems to like. This results in them setting up traps, but that results in Doc falling in all of them. After that, Melly tries to catch it with a net, but Doc is the one who got caught this time as well. In the end, she takes out an arrow with a sleeping potion and accidentally hits the Doc. The stress changes Melly's personality again and she blows themselves up. Following that day, Yaga arrives and realizes that they are not making any progress. He then suggests leaving the ogre with Kraken, as fighting a monster in its territory is no easy task. But Seth doesn't care about these things and wants to save Doc no matter what. Just then, Melba comes with her new blend of coffee, which gives Seth an idea. With that being said, Seth is back at it again with the coffee bucket on his head. Doc advises them to leave as that baddie doesn't give him the time of the day and it's better for him to stay with Kraken. Nonetheless, Seth refuses to give up and pours coffee on top of himself. This makes Kraken hold Seth and devour him. The Kraken suddenly starts acting weird and Melly mentions that the coffee was made out of the hardest hitting ingredients. Eventually, the Kraken throws up and spits Seth out of his mouth. It then falls onto the ground, giving Melly the chance to restrain it, followed by a Titan punch. Surprisingly, Doc tells them not to hurt Kraken as the two of them have become friends, making the creature tear up as well. Seth mentions that this makes the Kraken their friend as well. The next day, Doc along with Seth and Melly are having coffee together when Yaga arrives and Seth requests him to train him even harder, which he agrees to. Soon after, Melba shows up and Doc compliments her coffee without a break, only to find out that it was made by Papa instead. Seth is training with Yaga but fails to contain his powers, which as a result rips his gloves. Yaga tells Seth that he will be confiscating his old gloves and gives him special gloves with black silver woven into the fabric. Apparently, it prevents one from gathering fantasia, and if he tries to take them off, he receives a shock. Seth argues that he can't train with these, but Yaga confronts him for not being worthy and blames him for being incompetent. He then tells Seth that he gathers fantasia haphazardly and is so focused on pursuing power that he's forgotten something crucial. Yaga won't allow the gloves to come off until Seth finds the answer. Later that day, Melba notices the scary look on Seth's face and he elaborates what actually happened. Just then, Doc comes running and tells them that Garfield has sent them an invitation. With that being said, they pay the kitty a visit and he mentions that their debt has soared to unprecedented heights, making it the highest debt. He warns them to banish them if the debt isn't paid and ends up giving them the task of cleaning the ship. Meanwhile, Doc is working hard as well while thinking how all this hard work is for Melba. They end up cleaning the outer parts of the ship and notice something flying at a distance. Seth decides to check it out and at the same time, the Bravery Quartet is busy cleaning the ship when Dawn finds the location of a hidden treasure. Simultaneously, Seth runs into them but fails to recognize the group. The Bravery Quartet introduces themselves once again and Seth finally recognizes them. Melly appears and panics after seeing a hairy commando geezer. Dawn comments on how they are here for the treasure and Melly attacks them with meteor drops but they come out unscratched. Following that, they do a combined rice cake attack and Melly manages to block it as well. Seth is disgusted, knowing that what makes them sorcerers is their freaky plot. Both sides then start firing attacks on each other but manage to both the attacks each time. Surprisingly, Dawn notices that Seth can't use magic and agrees to take those gloves off if he ignores what they are doing. Furthermore, he reassures Seth that a man keeps his word and someone who defeated a nemesis deserves respect. Even when the offer seems tempting, Seth refuses to give in and mentions that he will never use his powers in such a pathetic way as they do. Now that the deal is off, they start attacking Seth once again, which results in Melly's personality transformation. She manages to blow some of them away, but Dawn is protected by a shield. Melly then does an attack that creates a smoke screen, giving Seth the chance to land a kick on the old fart's face. With the battle being over, Melly returns back to her normal self, giving Dawn the chance to grab her. Luckily, Mr. Boobry manages to save her and makes Dawn fall off the ship. Seth jumps off as well and takes off his gloves, eventually managing to save Dawn's life. Afterward, Seth informs Yaga that he took off the gloves and disobeyed his orders, but as Yaga was watching him, he decides to give Seth a passing grade. Following that, Yaga gives him a new set of gloves, commenting that Seth never tried to gather fantasia with gloves on and tried forcing fantasia around his arms. Turns out most sorcerers can't gather fantasia without gloves, and those who can are seen as heretics. This is the reason Alma gave Seth gloves to keep him out of trouble. With these new gloves, Seth can make use of the abilities he was born with. Seth and Melly are having lunch at the cafe when Yaga mentions the Inquisition. Seth mentions that they see sorcerers as enemies and Yaga elaborates that there are different kinds of Inquisitions and that it's important to know them before taking a fight. Meanwhile, Dart mentions that they have been free for so long that he started fishing. One of the knights wonders if their captain really is that unreliable, and the other one replies that he'll see how reliable he is soon. That night, Dart cooks for all his men himself, and the same knight seems concerned at this point. He starts questioning his decision to pick Dart as his captain. Following that night, the knight meets up with Dart and Dart mentions that it seems like he disappointed his men. Following that, Dart mentions that the super cool nickname he got was just by chance and he is also just another ordinary guy. Suddenly, it started raining and everyone started repairing the ship. After working hard the whole night, the knights talk about Rumbletown where the Inquisition started a large-scale heretic hunt and their captain was promoted. Elsewhere, Dart is fixing the ship as well when a knight arrives and informs Dart about the emergency signal of help they received from another squad. On the other hand, Yaga tells Seth that there are some good Inquisitions as well, but he is yet to meet one. Eventually, Dart arrives and is greeted by Captain Edmund, who tells Dart that they were attacked by a nemesis, but his aura was enough to repel it. Following that, Edmund shows Dart all the innocent sorcerers that he caught along the way. Later that day, Edmund asks Dart's men to fix their boat, and they are forced to as Edmund's men are injured after fighting the nemesis. That night makes up his mind to resign after the work is done and later goes to give Dart an update about work. Suddenly, a nemesis appears and Edmund recognizes it as the one that attacked their ship. Dart realizes that it has no intention of hurting them and is headed towards a town. Edmund lets out a sigh of relief and is glad that the nemesis is headed toward the town, making the knight question his mindset. But Edmund replies that their only enemies are the sorcerers and he doesn't have time to waste on monsters like that. Dart takes the side of his knight and tells Edmund that their duty is to protect the people from sorcerers and they need to do the same thing if a nemesis poses danger. Edmund tries to argue, but just then, all of Dart's men arrive, ready to take the nemesis head on. This results in Dart giving his men some words of motivation along with a promise to treat them with the best food after this mission. With that being said, their nemesis hunt begins, and the knight is motivated as well. Elsewhere, Edmund is furious at Dart for making him look like a party clown but is also glad that the nemesis will get rid of him. However, Dart's men return back and Edmund can't believe they drove off the nemesis with no casualties. Dart replies that all they did was injure it and let it sink into the cloud sea. Edmund hesitantly tries to sneak away, but Dart puts his weapon on Edmund's head, saying that none of the people he trapped were sorcerers and he was randomly catching them in order to further improve his ranking. This results in Edmund trying to bribe Dart, but he promises to have him judged by General Torque at headquarters. Following that, Dart makes a meal for them once again and that night eat it happily this time. Meanwhile, Dart remembers how the nemesis already had a deep wound on his body. Elsewhere, an unknown sorcerer is impressed that Dart's men drove away the nemesis he injured. Seth is roaming around the town with Melly and she informs him about the upcoming festival that the Yellow Kitty will be throwing. There will be a lot of stalls and fun activities, making Seth excited. Doc mentions that the headmaster only throws festivals to attract foreign visitors and their currency. Following that, Doc advises Seth to participate in the broom race and the headmaster announces the award to be 10 million dimes for whoever wins it. However, there is a participation fee as well and Seth is too much of a brokey to pay for it. Just then, an arrogant fool walks towards Seth and his lackeys introduce him as the champion of the previous 2 broom races. But Melly mentions that his money does all the work as he takes advantage of others, making the Emo furious. Following that, the arrogant boy, Nick, recognizes Seth as Alma's apprentice and continues to badmouth her. Seth argues that she is definitely the strongest and Nick asks him to prove it by taking part in the broom race. He instantly agrees and remembers the time when he used to live with Alma and was forced to clean their house. Apparently, it was his punishment for causing trouble and she advised him to be careful as he could get executed. The next day, he tried sneaking out of the house and she gave him her broom as a gift. This was where he promised her to become the best sorcerer in the world. Hearing this story makes Melly realize that Alma is a very important person to Seth. The next day, it is finally the time of the broom race and Seth is surprised to see all the luxurious brooms. All the participants start calling him a country bumpkin along with a nerd who mentions how Seth's broom doesn't have all the additional benefits that their broom has. Turns out, Melly is in the race as well and they decide to show others how cool Alma is. Meanwhile, Doc regrets paying for the participation fee and wants them to win at all costs. Now, it is time for the race to start and Seth starts remembering all the training he had done with everyone who helped him along the way. With that being said, the race starts and everyone is impressed that the vintage broom is performing that well. Yaga mentions that Seth has a superior broom and due to the hard training, he gained a bit of power. Just when Seth is about to catch up to Nick, the Yellow Kitty appears on his giant ship and realizing that his sponsor could lose, he blows the others away, almost costing Seth the race. However, this is not the end as the headmaster keeps on bothering the other participants with his flying ship, but Melly manages to defend Seth. This results in Seth trying to attack the kitty and he strikes back, but Seth absorbs the attack and punches the ship, making it explode. The explosion catches Melly off guard, but Seth manages to catch her. Meanwhile, the race is about to end and Doc starts freaking out about the results. Seth tries his best to catch up to Nick, but Nick increases his speed, making the lackeys fall down as he wins the race. Turns out Seth abandoned the race to catch the lackeys from falling down, winning the hearts of everyone watching. Later that day, Doc confronts Seth for not winning the race for a stupid reason and tries to teach him the value of money, but Seth seems to be happy about the results. The next day, Doc is stressed about their debt increasing even more and thinks of how Melba will never be with a peasant like him. He tries searching for some jobs and ends up finding one about a nemesis hunt. Suddenly, both Seth and Melly arrive and he tries his best to keep it a secret until Mr. Boobry gives them the job request, revealing Doc's secret. After carefully reading the application, Seth decides to take the job. Melly suggests the three of them go together, but Doc makes a clumsy excuse to stay out of it. Doc then mentions how there is no reason for the three of them to put themselves in danger. In the end, he tells them to go on their own, and just then, Melba appears and reads the job request as well. She thinks that Doc might be going with them as well and starts complimenting his bravery, making him change his mind in an instant and accept the job. Later, he regrets this decision, and before they leave, Yaga advises Seth to know what he needs to fight and what he needs to protect. At the same time, Dart spots their aircraft and asks his men to contact General Torque. Later, Seth and Melly are enjoying the sunset on their brooms, and Doc advises them to get back as the Inquisition are the ones in charge of that place. Eventually, they get closer to the city, which looks like it is still stuck in the 1920s. Eventually, they arrive at the town, and after parking the ship, Doc tells them to not draw any attention or the Inquisition will catch them in no time. Turns out they are supposed to visit Zelda's house that is on 12th Street. But after roaming around for a while, Doc starts feeling sick because of the toxic atmosphere. They decide to take a break, and Melly notices that Mr. Boobry has gone missing, and the two of them decide to go and search for it. Luckily, they manage to find it and notice a nemesis running around. Nonetheless, they start to follow it on their brooms when the nemesis attacks them, making them realize that there are two nemesis instead of one. Both the nemesis start attacking them at once, and after remembering Yaga's advice, Seth attacks them as well and manages to strike one of them. Suddenly, a girl starts playing a flute and the nemesis runs in that direction. Seth decides to chase them and notices that the number of nemesis keeps on increasing. Suddenly, a hand throws Seth away, breaking the broom. It turns out to be the mysterious sorcerer named Grimm. He asks about Seth's connection to those nemesis, saying that it may be the key to finding the individual that he has been pursuing for many years. Seth tries to argue with him, which makes Grimm take out his weapon and ask Seth his intentions one last time. Seth tries to attack Grimm but gets kicked in his guts, but he gets back up and tries attacking again. However, Grimm's attack makes Seth crash into the wall, but he doesn't give up yet and attacks Grimm once again, but as expected, Grimm comes out unscratched. Just then, Melly arrives to assist Seth, and Grimm decides to go away as people might come after the commotion they cause. After Grimm leaves, Seth tells Melly how strong he is, and at the same time, people start to gather, forcing the two of them to run away. Later, the captain of that town punishes the guard for letting them run away by making him do 10,000 push-ups. The next day, the knights are searching for Seth, and the three of them who were hiding in the trash box finally get out. Doc confronts Seth for causing trouble again, and he argues that it wasn't his fault. Apparently, there were 15 nemesis, which is enough to freak Doc out, but at the same time, he thinks about how rich he might be after catching them all. Meanwhile, Marburg decides to go and catch them on his own when he notices Dart chilling on his couch. He tries asking Dart the reason behind his visit, but all Dart does is further annoy him. After arguing for a while, Marburg manages to settle Dart down, but he still refuses to talk normally, enraging Marburg. Eventually, Dart mentions the sorcerers wandering around in his city and asks Marburg to stay out of it as it is an order from General Torque. Marburg finds it hard to comply but eventually is forced to. Elsewhere, the three of them finally arrive at Zelda's house, and Zelda scolds her husband for being rude towards the sorcerers. Furthermore, she informs them that her oldest son survived an attack from a nemesis, making Doc realize he might be a sorcerer now. Turns out the Inquisition doesn't believe the stuff Zelda said about nemesis, and Zelda's husband says that they won't do a thing for immigrants like them. Due to the highly industrial area, people from all over migrate to Rumbletown, but the people living there don't think so highly of immigrants. This results in Seth making up his mind to take care of the nemesis and Zelda's son, and Raj decides to show them the way. Following that, Taj informs them that he only saw one nemesis, and Melly believes he was contacted by the source nemesis that controls all the other smaller ones. Eventually, they arrive at the place where Taj saw the nemesis, and after entering the building, they come across a weird-looking tree. Apparently, these trees grow at the place where nemesis are, but one to grow this big is still unthinkable. Suddenly, the ground starts shaking and the knights begin evacuating people. Doc figures that years of digging up the earth have made this island unstable. Shockingly, Seth refuses to evacuate as he mentions how the nemesis might come out when everyone has left. After flying for a while, they manage to stop a few nemesis, and Seth decides to take care of the three running together. However, he fails to finish them off, and one of them attacks Seth, throwing him away. Luckily, Melly arrives and asks Seth to keep the nemesis in place while she restricts their movements. Eventually, they manage to capture 3 nemesis alive, and Doc starts thinking how this will make him rich and Melba might get down bad for him, while Melba thinks of all the food she can eat. At last, all there is left is to seal them in a scroll, and Melba starts working on it. Suddenly, more nemesis start falling into the circle Melly drew, and just then, a magic potion eliminates all of them. Seth recognizes Grimm to be the one behind it. Grim manages to find their intentions of capturing the nemesis alive and tries to leave. Seth starts running after Grim but fails to catch him. However, Melly managed to put a mark on him. Meanwhile, Grim takes some knights to the graveyard and feeds them to some monster in a coffin. At night, Seth and the others talk about the weird things taking place, and Doc suggests heading back to Artemis. Following that, Seth asks Doc about the weird mark on their bodies. Doc replies that he doesn't know that much but is aware of the fact that when the mark glows, it means that Nemesis is being controlled by a sorcerer. They are called the enemies of humanity and named Domitors. Elsewhere, the girl with the flute is sad regarding the fact that so many of the Nemesis lost their lives. The next day, Dart notices a street clown blaming the immigrants for the accident that Seth caused. He further mentions Dart visiting their town and how it is a great chance to get rid of those sorcerers and immigrants. Later, Dart blames Marburg for riling the people up so they'll hunt down the sorcerers and immigrants. He realizes that Marburg hates immigrants and he agrees, saying that the town has grown filthy because of them. Furthermore, Marburg calls immigrants to be more dangerous in his eyes than sorcerers. Dart promises to not button as the town is under Marburg's jurisdiction but asks if he is so preoccupied with immigrants that he is letting Nemesis go free. Marburg instantly refuses, asking Dart for concrete proof if he has any. Before leaving, Dart informs him that General Torque and the thaumaturges will be arriving in this town soon as they are after the horned sorcerer, Seth, that he has been pursuing. Later that day, Marburg thinks how sharp Dart is for finding out about the Nemesis and believes that he needs to advance his plan even if he has to cause the same incident that happened 15 years ago. Meanwhile, Doc is preparing to leave but Seth decides to stay. Doc informs him that the town has been ignoring the Nemesis, and he might not get his prey even if he manages to catch them. In the end, Doc leaves and Millie suggests going back to Taj's house. After arriving at his house, they find the place in a total mess and a person informs them that the family was taken by an authority for sheltering a sorcerer. Elsewhere, the mustache maniac lies to people about the immigrants and sorcerers joining hands to cause accidents and mentions that if nothing is done, the tragedy of 15 years can repeat itself. The people start to agree and he advises them to work with him in order to exterminate all the immigrants. Following that, Marburg tells them to target all the immigrants no matter how good they are and restore the peace of their town. This results in the citizens going berserk while Seth and Melly watch from above. Doc, who was on his way out, runs into the Nemesis hideout and decides to ignore it until the sorcerer catches him. Elsewhere, the people are about to burn Taj when Seth arrives to help him out and does the same thing that Alma did to protect him. On the other hand, Marburg's men inform him about Seth and he orders them to take out the cannons, commenting that a few citizens need to be sacrificed for the greater good. Taj starts crying about how his family was abducted and Melly realizes that it's all Marburg's doing. Just then, the townsfolk find them and Melly's personality switches and she is ready to attack them. However, Seth manages to stop her and flees the scene while carrying both of them. Suddenly, a cannonball strikes them and Marburg warns Seth and the others to surrender or they will be eliminated. Seth doesn't give a crap and attacks the knights instantly and Melly arrives to give him a hand as well. Just then, Marburg manages to strike Seth while Dart points his bow and arrow at Melly. Seth tries to power up Fantasia, but Marburg mentions how Melly can be eliminated if he does something rash. Furthermore, Doc also got captured and they put everyone in the cage except for Seth. Marburg takes off Seth's glove, saying that this way he can't use magic, but Dart advises him not to underestimate Seth and walks away. Meanwhile, Doc tells Melly that they can't use magic inside the cage and faints before he can say anything else. Elsewhere, Marburg shows Seth's and Taj's faces to all the citizens, blaming them for hiding a horde of Nemesis. This riles the people up, but everything changes when Marburg orders to close the gate, mentioning how everyone in the 12th Street will be eradicated. However, before Marburg can give any further orders, Seth manages to punch him in the face, making him crash into the cannons. This results in Marburg enraged as he orders them to bombard the people, but Grim appears and manages to stop all the cannons. Following that, Grim asks Seth if the Dormitor is his ally and Seth refuses. He also informs Seth that the Dormitor he has been searching for might be making her move. Just then, a tornado engulfs the clock tower and the girl orders the Nemesis to rush forward. Grim decides to go and fight her while Seth tells Raj to hide. Suddenly, Marburg appears in front of Seth and mentions that he paid a high price to the Dormitor girl for what she's doing. On the other hand, Melly realizes that Doc has no pulse and starts crying when flying debris hits the cage and opens the door. This results in Melly saving the knights from Nemesis and deciding to fight her heart out. Elsewhere, Grim wonders why the girl decided to make her move now and if it is necessary to go this far. At the same time, Seth's attacks don't have much effect on Marburg as he starts mocking Seth's powers. Seth tries attacking once again but gets pinned down by Marburg and is almost crushed beneath his lance. He starts mocking Marburg for his mustache to be the only part of his body with hair, making him furious. On the other hand, a girl with her baby tries to escape but the knights block her way. Just then, Dart arrives and tells the knights that they should be fighting the nemesis and not themselves. Suddenly, a nemesis that Melly beat falls behind him and Dart eliminates the nemesis behind Melly, ignoring Melly for the time being. Meanwhile, the bell on the clock tower starts to ring and the Dormitor uses her powers to tell the people that this is a reenactment of what happened 15 years ago. Simultaneously, Raj figures that someone has to open the gates and Seth holds Marburg's lance, giving Raj a chance to open the gate. Following that, Seth manages to land a knee attack on Marburg and steals his freaky-looking mustache. Luckily, Raj manages to go to the gate and open it. He gets caught by the knights, only to realize that he only opened one of the two gates. Eventually, the bell is launched into the sky and Marburg mentions how only the immigrants will be crushed by it. He then shows his mark to Seth, saying that a new Rumble town will be born. The bell ends up striking the 6th street in the castle that Marburg built from the ground up. He questions the girl, Haimline, and she tells him a story of the past. Apparently, the Inquisition took some infected children in and devised a plan to make them into soldiers to fight the nemesis. They were thrown in prison and struggled to live every day. People started calling them monsters, but a man told them to ignore those people and made them cheer up. His name was Oxymer, and he gave Haimline a flute as a present, advising her to start practicing. One day, another soldier appeared in front of the cage with a crossbow, calling them monsters and was ready to eliminate them until Oxymer arrived, telling the knight, who was Marburg, to be kind to the kids as they are humans just like them. Later that night, an unknown man released the kids, and little did they know that a hell worse than the prison was waiting for them. The citizens targeted those kids and, in the end, only Haimline survived. Oxymer mourned their demise with Haimline while Marburg began devising another plan. A few days later, a nemesis appeared in town and Marburg told Oxymer that they had orders to shelter the residents in the prison, also asking to deploy Haimline to fight it. After hesitating for a while, Oxymer agreed and asked Haimline for help, promising to protect her at all costs. Just then, Marburg stabbed Oxymer, saying that it was all for the sake of this town's future. However, Oxymer stood up and pinned Marburg to the wall, telling Haimline to run away. She ran away as far as she could and remembered Oxymer giving her the flute. She began playing it, which resulted in the nemesis appearing in front of her. They were not attacking her and she realized that it was due to the flute. Suddenly, the knights started firing cannonballs, causing the 13th street to fall. She told this story to everyone in the town and blamed Marburg. Haimline then started confronting Marburg, and he mentioned how he would even climb on the citizens' corpses to claim victory. This resulted in the people getting mad at Marburg, but Haimline cleared that she wasn't on their side as they would be getting eliminated as well. She blamed them for wanting to execute the infected people and says that she vividly remembers the pain and despair she felt that day, as people of this town want someone else to make decisions for them like ragdoll puppets. Haimline wants to decide their fate for them. Just then, Grim appears and Marburg uses this chance to order his soldiers and they silently obey him. Seth then blames Marburg for all the trouble and calls him the weakest man in Rumble Town. This makes the cheap copy of Tyne from Dragon Ball Z mad, and he tries attacking Seth but he stops Marburg's lance. Marburg tries attacking him once again but Seth survives and rushes towards Marburg once again. Seth tells Marburg that they are not monsters and punches him in his guts, followed by a kick to his face. He then stops Marburg's lance with one hand, but Marburg still manages to throw him in the air. Furthermore, he attacks Seth with his lance, but Seth manages to absorb the attack and rush down towards Marburg, punching his lance as it begins to crack. This attack finally brings Marburg down and Seth also falls to the ground. The attack also blows away the gate and Raj gets reunited with his family. Just then, Dart appears and tells Seth to come with him quietly. Suddenly, the balloons holding the island start breaking and Seth tries to run away but Dart stops him. This makes Seth question if his job isn't protecting the people. Additionally, he tells Dart about his dream of going to Radiant, and Dart challenges him to catch Haimline first, to which he agrees. Elsewhere, the thaumaturges find proof of all the dirty work that Marburg has been doing and comment on how the only thing going his way is his mustache. Almina mentions that it was the female sorcerers who made him stray away from the right path by giving the cherry boy some hope and yells at Centauri for ignoring her. Torque says that the truth will come to light and reminds everyone about their true objective. One of the thaumaturges notices something and flies off the ship to check it out. Meanwhile, Grim and Haimline are still at it and he eliminates one of the nemesis, making her enraged. Eventually, he manages to catch her and asks her about the person who taught her the skills of Dormitor, saying that he will eliminate all her nemesis, making Haimline attack her. On the other hand, Melly is lying on the floor, blaming herself for failing. Her personality then switches and she starts eliminating all the nemesis nearby. Just then, Seth arrives, which makes her revert back to normal. She starts crying, telling him about Doc, but Seth mentions how Doc is okay and turned into a baby. Seth elaborates that he found Doc's body and a baby Doc emerged from it. This makes Doc realize that his curse was molting, and Melly hugs Doc, relieved that he is still alive. Soon after, Grim appears and warns Seth that the Dominator is really powerful and not someone a spiky-head weakling like him can handle. But Seth refuses, and Melly says that she can restrain the Nemesis while he can stop the Dominator. Eventually, Grim allows them to assist him. Later, Haimline notices the three of them heading her way, and Seth manages to eliminate the Nemesis at the front but gets attacked by Haimline in return. Afterward, Seth finds himself in a strange place, and the thaumaturges from before appear and reveal his face. Meanwhile, Grim can't understand what happened but can still feel his heartbeat. Nonetheless, they decide to go with the current plan, and Grim flies above while Melly attacks Haimline but is tossed aside. Following that, Melly asks Haimline to not hurt any more people, as even if the Nemesis are her dear friends, her actions are way too cruel. But Haimline argues that this city took everything away from her. Grim also arrives and mentions that Melly already did the thing she was supposed to. Suddenly, all of Haimline's fantasia starts accumulating in a lamp that Melly owns, which makes her unable to use magic or control the Nemesis. Furthermore, Grim mentions that Seth was against taking Haimline's life and says that even he is now incapable of taking anyone's life. He then takes out a sword and starts fighting Haimline, promising to only slay Nemesis. Meanwhile, the thaumaturges introduces himself as Piotr and tells Seth that he observes some mechanisms of this world. Piotr asks Seth why he is keeping his powers sealed, as it stops him from using his full potential, and Seth replies that his bandage is to keep the curse from further spreading. But Piotr replies that the seal is stopping him from using his full potential. Furthermore, he asks Seth if he is fighting for the common people or fighting them like Haimline. But before he can reply, Piotr's powers start coming to an end, and Seth dashes away, thanking Piotr for saving him. Piotr asks him not to lose his life as he is his precious family. Elsewhere, Haimline keeps on attacking Grim, and he manages to defend himself. Melly tells Grim that her fantasia is combining with that of Nemesis, and her lamp can't take it all in. This results in her powers increasing, and just then, Seth appears. Without any hesitation, Haimline attacks Seth, and he tells her that the reason behind his return is to stop her from destroying the island. While Seth is fighting, the other two get away, and Grim tells her that they won't be able to save anyone if they go down with the island. Meanwhile, Haimline attacks Seth again, and he uses Skill Burst to counter it. But her powers start to overwhelm Seth as she tells him not to protect the people of this town as they are not worth it. Following that, Seth tells Haimline that her only enemy is Marburg, and she replies that eliminating one Inquisitor is not enough as they ignore the people in danger and wag their tails for authority figures. Additionally, the common people are the ones fueling the Inquisitors. Seth tells Haimline that by attacking the people of this town, she is doing the same thing that Marburg wanted to do. This results in Haimline asking the side Seth is on, and this reminds him of Piotr, and he replies that his only goal is to protect people. Haimline gets furious and attacks him once again, saying that those exact people took everything from her and tormented them for fun. After throwing him away, she attacks him, but this time, the intensity of it is more than all of her previous attacks. Haimline questions Seth if he wants to protect those who torment them, and Seth disagrees, saying that he is the same as her while he gets enveloped by the attack. The balloons start flying away, and Grim mentions that the battle is already over as Seth is in agreement with her. Meanwhile, Seth tells Haimline that he wants to destroy everything as well, and she walks towards him. He further mentions that all his childhood, he was tormented by people and wanted to hurt them as well, but was stopped by the person who raised him. Haimline says that she isn't doing this for revenge and rests her head on Seth's shoulders. However, instead of raising her up, Seth uses this chance to throw her bag away and pin her down to the ground. Haimline asks Seth if he will just follow his master's orders like a domesticated puppy and execute her, but he disagrees. Seth promises not to hand her over to Inquisitions, but Haimline argues that there are only two sides and he has to pick one. But he disagrees and tells Haimline his dream of destroying Radiant. She calls it a pipe dream, and Seth asks for her help in order to change the world. Suddenly, a bright light starts appearing from the sky, which turns out to be Centauri's powers. The thaumaturge's ship also arrives, and seeing all the big dogs appear makes Dart wonder if there is something more to Seth. Soon after, the other two also arrive, and Grim informs them that the thaumaturges are using a different power known as a miracle. Centauri then calls out Seth and blames him for everything that has been happening in Rumbletown for the past few days, along with some other crimes as well. Even though Seth doesn't remember anything, he feels as if he remembers all the names that Centauri is reciting. Suddenly, Haimline puts her weapon to Seth's throat, agreeing to give him to them. Centauri says that they don't negotiate with sorcerers, and Haimline replies that she can always eliminate him as he must be important for all the thaumaturges to come for him. She then slowly walks towards her bag and uses her powers to attack Centauri, but it doesn't affect him that much. Haimline tells Seth and the others to run away, asking him to take care of her nemesis as they aren't evil. In the end, she gives him a kiss on the cheek and walks away to fight Centauri. Melly and Grim forcefully take Seth away while he begs to let him go. Sadly, Torque manages to stab Haimline, resulting in her going down. After seeing Haimline lose her life, Seth jumps towards Torque but gets punched by Vaughn. Just when Vaughn is about to hit him again, Pyaden uses his powers to control Seth and unleash his powers. Even Grimm is surprised by the amount of fantasia coming out of Seth. Vaughn tries attacking Seth again but gets humbled really quickly. Santori then tries attacking Seth, but one strike of his causes his hand to burn. The curse starts eating Seth away, and Torque decides to end this quickly. He then takes out his sword and moves towards Seth, telling him that his hands are losing link with fantasia. Seth tries attacking Torque and he pushes Seth away. Santori then tries punching Seth, which breaks the edge of the island, allowing Seth to run away. Torque then asks Santori about Seth's comrades, and he replies that they also managed to get away. He then orders Lyslot to command the reconnaissance team and Almana to command the rescue team. Meanwhile, Grimm and Melly manage to take Seth away, and she mentions how this was a different side of Seth. Before leaving the place, Grimm takes out a coffin and various people get out of it and walk away. He tells Melly that these are all the infected people that he was protecting from Marburg. Doc also comes out of the coffin, saying that he never wants to go back in. Just then, a ship from Artemis arrives to pick them up by the orders of the Yellow Kitty. Dart apologizes to Torque for not capturing Seth sooner and he forgives him, mentioning all the lives he saved. Suddenly, fireworks start happening all around the town along with balloons flying everywhere. The citizens think that it might be a celebration, but in reality, it was done by the Artemis people in order to distract everyone, making their escape easier. On the other hand, Seth starts seeing all his past memories and conveniently remembers his first contact with the opposite gender. Following that, he thinks about how all he did was throw the town into chaos and blames Pyaden for what he did. Pyaden mentions that it was the only way to save him, as he along with his friends could have lost their lives. Seth then mentions how during the rampage, memories that he doesn't recognize poured into him. Pyaden replies that it was his own powers and memories that he doesn't currently understand. There are parts of Seth's body he can't get in touch with, and all Pyaden did was assist him. Eventually, Pyaden informs Seth that he is his older brother, but Seth can't get the thought of that baddie out of his mind, regretting how he couldn't help Haimline. In the end, he asks Pyaden if he can destroy Radiant and fix everything if he possesses great powers, but Pyaden doesn't know the answer. The next day, Doc and Melly are sitting next to Seth, who is still unconscious. Doc starts teasing Melly's other personality for sitting next to Seth and being worried about him, making her mad. Melly then roasts Doc's body as he is worried about what he will face Melba. Just then, Seth wakes up and Melly starts crying, saying that she was worried as he slept for a whole week. Surprisingly, Grimm also appears to pay Seth a visit, and they talk about not recognizing each other's good intentions before. He then asks Seth if his wounds were inflicted by Torque, informing him that Torque's powers allow him to nullify fantasia and that wounds caused by his powers can't be healed with magic. Furthermore, Grimm reassures Seth that the Rumble Town will most likely be better than it previously was. Additionally, all the nemesis that Haimline had are living peacefully at the academy. Elsewhere, a sorcerer comments on how the headmaster burned a ton of cash for Seth, and he thinks about how things will get interesting from now on. Melba welcomes back everyone, and Melly informs her about what happened to Doc. Surprisingly, this results in Melba holding and hugging Doc, making it the best day of his life. She then decides to give him a diaper change, but Doc is too shy to expose his peanut-sized pencil. However, turns out, Papa is the one to do the job. Following that, everyone enjoys food while Doc can't stop crying. Melba then tells them that they are the talk of the town and shows the recent newspaper. Everyone is calling Seth a hero, but he doesn't feel like one. Just then, a message from the headmaster arrives, inviting them to a party that he is holding for them. Doc is anxious that it might add more to their debt, but Melly is sure he will not take money from them. Melly ends up inviting Melba as well, and Doc starts thinking about how she might dance with other men and ignore Doc because of his Smurf-sized body. Papa also likes the idea, and they decide to go. At night, they all arrive at the party all dressed up, and Seth notices that Doc has got a little bigger. Melly informs Seth that Doc wanted to buy a growth potion and ended up giving a huge sum of money for it. He thought that he might become a tall, handsome dude and would be able to enjoy a romantic dance with Melba, only to add a few inches to his current height. Turns out that the potion's effects are random, and if he drinks another, he could have become an old geezer. They then start checking out the delicious food served when suddenly, the focus shifts towards Seth and he is forced to step on the main stage. Afterward, the Yellow Kitty starts glazing himself by saying that Seth was just an ordinary boy but changed after the headmaster inspired him. He further informs everyone that Seth fought an Inquisitor and a Dormitor along with managing to capture some nemesis alive. Everyone then starts chanting his name and calling Seth a hero, but he disagrees. The headmaster then asks Seth about his next goal, and he mentions destroying Radiant, which confuses everyone, but they still cheer him on. Following that, Seth is thrown into the crowd where all the girls start flocking over him. Just then, Nick arrives and starts confronting Seth, saying that he was lucky. The annoying emo boy then challenges Seth to a duel, but he refuses. This results in Nick trying to mock Seth and trash talk Haimline, forcing him to punch Nick's disgusting-looking face. He tells Nick not to say anything bad about her and to keep his mouth shut. Afterward, Seth asks the people gathered around about Radiant, but everyone is unaware, and eventually, Seth quietly walks away. The following day, Seth is looking at the Nemesis when, shockingly, Alma appears and scolds him for not getting in touch with her. Alma then mentions that Melly is the one who contacted her. She then asks Seth about Rumble Town, and Seth says that he isn't a hero because he couldn't save Haimline. Additionally, he went berserk and caused everyone trouble. Seth starts to think how nothing has gone right since he left his house, and suddenly, Alma knees his head, telling him that she got a letter from Raj. In that letter, Raj mentions that everything has been going great and people are starting to come around in order to build a new Rumble Town. He thanks Seth for all he did and promises to become a great sorcerer like him one day. Alma says that even if he couldn't save everyone, he still changed a lot. Even Alma is starting to get along with the villagers, and Melly put off her treatment to look after Seth, saying that he was the one who saved her. Hearing all this cheers Seth up and he thanks Alma, followed by him hugging Melly and Doc as well. Apparently, Dart is being punished because he interfered with Rumble Town without consulting Torque or the other higher-ups. Dart's Night Talk is not happy giving up their rations to Rumble Town citizens, and the vice captain tells him to stop complaining as Dart might feel responsible for the mess as he couldn't stop Marber. Later, they land at a nearby island and are tasked with finding food, but as it turns out, they are getting chased by a giant bunny and Dart manages to make it run away. The vice captain then suggests they go after the boar. Elsewhere, Torque talks to Piotr about how Dart wants to uphold justice in the world but doesn't believe he alone can do it, while Torque thinks he can. Sadly, Dart's men are not able to collect enough rations and he is forced to ask the local town for food. However, not a single town is willing to share their food because of what happened in Rumble Town. If anyone in the Inquisition screws up, the common people turn their back on all of them, and Dart believes it's unfair, just like how they treat all the sorcerers the same way. Later that day, the Knight questions Dart about the reason they ended up in this mess even when they tried doing the right thing, and Dart replies that doing good things doesn't always guarantee good results. Then, the Knight gives Dart an idea, and the town they saved from the Nemesis agrees to share some of their food with Dart and his men. Dart then asks the vice captain to change courses and head to accept the rations from that town. On the other hand, Seth takes Alma to Melba Cafe where everyone is chill except for Doc, who is freaking out. Melba informs everyone that the price of coffee is rising up and their cafe could go out of business. Melba figures it might be due to what happened in Rumble Town. Seth can't understand, and Doc explains that Rumble Town connects the northern and southern continents and the trades have to pass through that town to be delivered to Artemis. Suddenly, Doc starts freaking out and they decide to check up on Kraken, who is also pretty much a corpse because of a lack of coffee. In the end, they decide to save Kraken by finding some coffee beans, and Seth accidentally makes Doc drink octopus ink instead of coffee. Nonetheless, he keeps on bringing other stuff but gets it wrong each time. Eventually, he manages to find actual coffee beans, and after they feed some of it to Kraken, he gets energized. Seth then tells Doc the price of coffee beans, which turns out to be $1,000,000 dimes, making Doc faint. Elsewhere, Dart's men are enjoying dinner while he tells the vice captain that he is summoned to the headquarters. He tells the vice captain that there is no guarantee he might come back alive, and the only reason he was hesitating was leaving his men behind, but now he is confident that they'll be alright. Meanwhile, Seth is sitting on his own and Alma tells him that the best time to keep moving is when they are thinking about things that don't suit them. She realizes that Seth is afraid of something and he asks Alma if he really is a monster. Seth is back in his old town and trying to buy a gift for Millie. Alma mentions the letter she got from her and mocks Seth for making a girl worry over him. Later, they receive a letter from Yaga, where he asks Alma to tell Seth to go to Cashley and Merlin as the night sorcerers there are searching for Radiant. However, the Inquisitions are also about to start sorcerer hunting in Cashley and Merlin. Furthermore, Yaga tells Alma that Seth has grown a lot and he now needs to find his own answers as he walks his own path. Following that, Seth asks Melly and Doc to accompany him, but Doc refuses to do so. Both of them get into an argument, and Doc tells him to repay his debt if he wants his help. However, Melly doesn't have any problem helping Seth, and Doc reminds her that she is his assistant and not Seth's. Just then, Melba arrives and Doc starts trying to rizz her up again, followed by him asking Melly to run an errand for him as he needs to earn some money to repay the debt. His stubbornness makes Melly mad and she walks away. After she leaves, Doc questions Seth if he wants to put Melly into more trouble. This makes Seth contemplate how he was lucky to come back alive and wonder if there will be more fights like this in the future. He then starts thinking of Haimline's words to not treat Nemesis as a monster, which gives him the reason to go to Radiant and check things out on his own. Suddenly, the headmaster arrives, asking if he wants more debt. He asks Seth if he is heading to Cashley and Merlin, surprising Seth about the fact that the kitty already knew. The headmaster tells Seth that other than Artemis, no other place is safe for sorcerers. Following that, the kitty adds that he has added the cost of the party to his debt as well, making Seth argue with him. Just then, Alma arrives and the Majesty figures that Seth is the kid she was raising. Alma asks the headmaster if he thinks Seth will run away without repaying the debt, and he replies that Seth won't, as he needs to repay the debt even if he meets his demise. Suddenly, the warning sirens start going off and the kitty figures that the island entered a dangerous area. This results in him deploying the safety barriers and sending the sorcerers out. A fight between Nemesis and sorcerers begins, and Alma asks Seth to not do anything reckless. Soon after, Nick arrives and mocks Seth for not doing anything to help, and Seth argues that not all Nemesis are bad. Just then, Doc comes running and tells Seth that Melly might be unaware, and Seth snatches the broom from Nick and runs away. Elsewhere, a Nemesis egg falls near Melly and the Nemesis is about to attack her, but Seth arrives in the nick of time and saves her. The two of them run away from the Nemesis on their broom, and the Nemesis starts following them. Eventually, Melly uses her powers to restrict its movement, giving Seth the chance to attack. However, the Nemesis gets back up and Seth pushes Melly away to get attacked by the Nemesis. This results in Seth going berserk once again and instantly eliminating the Nemesis, only to get back to his normal state again. The next morning, Melly finds a note in her house from Seth, who says his goodbyes as he doesn't want to cause more trouble. Apparently, he decided to go back with Alma as his unknown powers were still too dangerous. Doc is also a little disappointed that Seth left, but tries his best to hide his feelings. Elsewhere, Piotr says that this is a new beginning, asking Seth to show him the answer. This was all about our sorcerers. Do you think Melly will follow Seth to his next location? Comment coffee below if you'd like for Doc and Melba to get together. Make sure to like and subscribe. See you guys in the next video.